Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. It is my pleasure to present to you Professor Nobuo Kazashi from the Graduate School of Humanities at Kobe University, Japan. Professor Kazashi is my personal mentor as well as a friend, and it's a great pleasure for me to be able to present him to you tonight. Professor Kazashi works at Kobe, got his MA from Tokyo University of Foreign Studies, and he got his PhD from Yale University. And he's a specialist in many different fields, from American pragmatism to Japanese studies and philosophy. So I think we're going to have an interesting lecture, and I hope even more interesting discussion afterward. So without further ado, I present to you Professor Kazashi.
Thank you very much, Jordanco, for a nice, generous introduction. So good evening, everybody. And so I'm very delighted and honored to be able to talk to you tonight. And when I was asked to come here, I wondered what I can talk about, but I chose to talk about Murakami Haruki for some reasons. One reason is that at Kobe University, one of the seminars I'm teaching is for foreign students in English, and for foreign students who are not necessarily studying Japanese language. And so, every year I choose some text related to Japanese culture and literature or philosophy, but not really in a very narrow sense, philosophy text. And this year, before the summer, we read an essay on Murakami Haruki. And one of the reasons is that, of course, I guess some of you also have read some works by Murakami Haruki, I guess. And I'm curious, could you raise your hand if you have read some works? Maybe, looks like maybe 1/4? Not so many as I expected. And there's another reason. As you may know, Murakami Haruki was born in Kyoto, but he moved quickly to Kobe area. And he went to, he spent his teenage time until he left high school and to come up to Tokyo to study at the Waseda University, where Professor Morioka is now teaching. And so there's some association with Murakami Haruki in Kobe. And so, and another reason is when I had a talk with foreign students, I came to feel that there's a gap in the kind of image I had about Murakami Haruki and some of the foreign students had about him. And so I wondered where this difference comes from. So I became more interested in, and I read more, and now I feel that now I understand what are really at the core of his literary work and careers. So tonight, I'd like to share some of my thoughts with you, and I'd be delighted if we can have some exchange after my talk. I try to finish my talk in around 50 minutes or so, at the longest. So the title is Haruki Murakami's Commitments, Music, Running, and Underground. Violence and Narratives in Contemporary Japan. And the underground here can have more than one meaning. Of course, it can mean a subway, And also literally it can mean the underground. And also psychologically it can mean unconscious. I think in Murakami Haruki, these three sort of meanings are mixed together. And let me talk about it. So he was born in 1949, and as I said, he was raised in Kobe and came to Tokyo to spend his student years, and he's basically 20s. And after that, he went, after initial sort of literary success, he decided to go to Europe and the US, and spending, I guess, almost 10 years or so. But he decided to come back to Japan. That happened to coincide with the 1995 Kobe earthquake and the Tokyo submarine sarin attack. You may know. In the latter half of my talk, I'd like to sort of present some of his ideas about Japanese contemporary society and the role of storytelling or narrative in dealing with violence and problems in Japan. And lastly, if there's some time left, I'd like to present my own sort of thoughts and some critical views about Murakami Haruki. So this is just an abstract. So before going into Murakami Haruki, let me give you a very broad background, historical, geographical. So Kobe has a very special place in modern Japanese thought. And so very quickly, for example, there's a philosopher, Watsuji Tetsuro, who was born in Okayama Prefecture, Himeji. And one of his works known is called Fudo. Difficult to translate, but basically it is about environment. And but before writing this book, he went to Europe, especially Germany. And during these days, you know, today we can move easily between Japan and China and Europe and the US by airplanes. But these days, people had to use ships. It takes many months, right? So when Japanese scholars, intellectuals went out to Europe or the US, usually it is from Kobe port that went out and they came back. So in the case of philosopher Watsuji Tetsuro, on his way to Europe, he stopped by various ports in Asia and in the Arab countries. So, and he says he was literally astonished when saw the real desert in the Arab country. Of course, there's a word, sabaku, meaning desert in Japanese language, but he had never seen the real large-scale desert. So, and he came to realize there are huge, really huge difference in geography and what he wrote was this book, Fudo, Environment. And there are some sort of problems of overgeneralization, but simply because it is about environment, natural environment. there's a sort of increase, renewed interest in this work. And another case, scholar Kato Shuichi, he was one of the young scholars who were sent to Europe immediately after the defeat of Japan in the war. And he also went out from Kobe and came back to Kobe. And he spent 4 years in France. And he writes in this collection of essays entitled Zashu Bunka Nihon no Chisana Kibo, Hybrid Culture, Japan's Little Hope. This was written in 1956 after coming back. And he writes that when he was staying in France, he was conscious solely about the contrast between Japan and Europe. But when he came back, stopping by various ports in Asia also, he came to sense that there are very interesting, clear differences among the Asian port cities, like Hong Kong and Singapore, Shanghai. So when he landed at Kobe port, he found Kobe, the atmosphere of Kobe is interesting in the sense it is a hybrid culture, you know. Just like Singapore and Shanghai and Hong Kong are also hybrid culture, right? And Kato Shuichi writes that he felt there are very interesting differences in hybridity, how these different Asian countries are hybrid cultures. And what he mean by hybrid culture doesn't mean that there are all sorts of ethnic food available or ethnic groups, including Chinese people, are living. But actually, very interestingly, I think, he includes Japan's so-called peace constitution as a product of Japan's hybrid culture, modern culture. So, and he says, you might find the subtitle interesting, you know, Japan's Little Hope. So this means during the wartime, there was a very totalitarian, nationalistic, Japan-centrist ideology, right? So this emphasis or affirmative, sort of a affirmative evaluation of hybrid culture itself was a critique of the wartime ideology. And so, as the subtitle says, according to Kato Shuichi, post-war Japan's hope should be sought or looked for in this possibility of hybrid culture. And I think we can place Murakami Haruki's sort of career along this line. This is my first sort of reading. So let me sit down from here. So I hear that some of you are studying literature. So have you read some works by Tanizaki Junichiro, for example, Makioka Sisters? And Tanizaki also liked the area called Ashiya near Kobe. And if you like Japanese sweets. There's a wonderful sweet sort of a shop where Tanizaki used to visit, and it is a very nice sweet. So I think if you have a chance to come over to Kobe for sightseeing, you might want to visit it. And as for Murakami Haruki, he has written quite a number of essays, and which I find very interesting. And some of them have been translated into English, and some have not. But one of the essay, he sort of reflect back on his school days in Kobe. Basically, he says he didn't like the high school classes, but he says he read literally lots and lots of books. He was a very voracious reader, and for example, he expresses, for example, he writes, as if throwing books into a burning stove with a shovel. So burning stove was a metaphor for young Murakami. So this means Murakami Haruki read really lots and lots of books as if throwing them into a burning stove using a shovel, you know. And but he sort of reflecting on his reading in his teenage years. Murakami says this was very important for him in the sense that he could be exposed to many ways of thinking and feeling and many cultures. So he could learn the importance of free spirit and imagination with many perspectives. And actually, after the Fukushima disaster, nuclear disaster happened, Murakami Haruki says, actually this was exactly what was lacking in Japanese society. That is a free imagination, to think of a new, different sort of way of society, not depending on nuclear power generation. And another very distinctive, characteristic sort of episode or point about his teenage years is that he encountered American jazz, also other kinds of music, and he really became absorbed in these musical experiences. And but thirdly, there's a very serious troubling sort of element related to the fact that he was raised in Kobe, where there's a Chinatown. And actually, he writes that even today, he cannot eat Chinese food, Chinese dishes. And this is a very unconscious sort of thing. And even he himself doesn't know the reason. So, and there's a sort of unconscious, sort of complicated, sort of emotional relationship with China and Chinese people. And this comes up in a very enigmatic, hard to understand ways in his early short stories. And, but as we read along his recent long stories, I think we can see more clearly why, for example, he cannot eat Chinese food. This is a very strong thing, right? maybe most of you enjoy Chinese food, but he said he cannot eat without knowing. So there's a sort of very interesting interview with a Japanese conductor, Ozawa Seiji, dialogues. It's translated under the title Absolutely on Music, Conversation with Seiji Ozawa. I'd like to go deeper into this quote, but maybe I will not have time. So, but let me point out the point. So let me read only the blue sentences. So Murakami says, so how did I learn to write? From listening to music. And what's the most important thing in writing? It's rhythm. And so actually he uses the expression of polyrhythm. So rhythm can be produced from many sort of angles and on many dimensions. And this is one of the part I find the most interesting. So he talks about Mahler's music, and basically, so let me read just the blue part. In Mahler's music, though, it feels as though he's deliberately plunging down into the dark, into the subterranean, underground realm, domain of the mind, as if in a dream. You find many motifs that contradict one another, that are in opposition. So this shows, I think, Murakami Haruki really feels sympathy with Mahler's music for this reason. And so maybe. So I think, in a sense, this is another sort of musical sort of expression of the cosmopolitan sort of character of Murakami Haruki's sort of bringing up. And this is a very one of the sort of core points I'd like to talk about today. It is related to China program or the war. Well, this is from you may know he received the Jerusalem Award in 2009. So this is a part of the acceptance speech. He said, "My father died last year at the age of 90. I used to see him every morning before breakfast, offering up long, deep felt prayers at the Buddhist altar in our house. Staring at his back as he knelt at the altar, I seemed to feel the shadow of death hovering around him. But the presence of death that lurked hidden, which was hiding about him, remains in my memory. It is one of the few things I carry on from him, and one of the most important, the theme of relationship with the dead." Now, actually, some of the Japanese, you may know, there are a huge number of fans, right? Not only in Japan, but abroad, fan of his literature. But among the literary critics, it's been a very complicated issue in Japan, particularly. There has been a group of people who really liked his works, but there was some others who really who did not think his works are worth sort of consideration. But some of the Japanese critics who really values his works highly also says that this question of the relationship with the dead people, is really at the center of Murakami Haruki's work all through. So I think, but this also can be related to not only the dead people, but also those people who disappear from our life without any reason, you know. There are many people in your life who have already disappeared, even if they are living, right? And so, coming to Tokyo from, you notice 1968, this is a very turbulent year all around the world. So Murakami Haruki's friends at the university also were involved, and some of them even killed each other. So this was really at the background of his sort of concerns. And one of the things I found interesting is that I think he was majoring in theater at Waseda University, and he was reading many scenarios at special libraries, and you know, scenarios of the famous movies, not looking at the movies themselves. So this was interesting, isn't it? So he said, because there were no images, just like in movies, he was reading just scenarios in words. So he had to use his imagination to make the stories alive. So I think this was at the sort of base of his work. And also this is a second point, is another very well-known fact among the fans, at least. He did not want to work for the sort of, company workers, and I think he graduated after spending 7 years at Waseda University. But this was not an unusual case for this time. And so he started a jazz bar in Tokyo, and the name of Peter Cat, cat. Murakami Haruki loves cats, right? Peter Cat. And you may have an image that, oh, Murakami Haruki had a jazz bar. It must have been a very fancy, nice young years. But actually, he writes, it was really, really hard working several years. And from morning until late night, he simply worked, and to make a living. But one day, without knowing, he felt he wanted to write something. And this was a start, and so the first work was Kaze no Uta o Kike, Hear the Winds Sing. And but when he was writing this first story, Murakami, he says, first, he did not know what he could write, and actually he had nothing to write about. And so, but eventually he came to think that, well, then let's write about the fact that I have nothing to write. And so he started write his life, and but he didn't like the kind of stories he could write in Japanese. So the next thing is very interesting. So he translated his own Japanese writing into English. And so, you know, when you try to express your ideas in foreign language, of course your ideas have to become simplified, right? So this was what happened when he translated his sentences into English. But actually, he felt, oh, this is quite nice, actually. You know, simple words and very simple grammar, but there's something going on. So then he translated it back into Japanese. And he said this was the time when he felt that maybe he was beginning to obtain his own style. And when he was working on this work, as I quoted, what he tried to do is to write sentences thinking of musical rhythm as model. So what is important is a linguistic rhythm that can be created. So he repeatedly says in his essays, he tried to write just like to produce music. So this was here's a weird thing, and fortunately, it got a prize, literary prize, and so after a couple of years, he decided to close the jazz club in order to devote himself to writing, and it was a risky bet, but he came up the wild sheep chase, and this was evaluated by some critics. So, and another point about his life I find very distinctive. Do you know what time he gets up every day? He writes he gets up every day around 4 in the morning. And after that, he just concentrates on his work for 4 or 5 years. And that's it. And after that, he does not work. And he does what he does, listen to music or do running. And because he stopped hard working, he said he began gaining weight. So that is the reason why he started running. But maybe some of you know he's a really devoted runner, right? He has participated in Boston Marathon and Hawaii Honolulu Marathon, and so he said basically, in principle, he has been running literally every day for the last more than 30 years. Of course, except a few days. And so I think, but you know what, he said this kind of very, ascetic, almost ascetic lifestyle is needed, is necessary for him to be able to keep writing long stories. And I think I have to go more quickly. So after this, he decided to go to Europe, Greece, Italy, and UK. And so here comes the Norwegian Wood. And it became a worldwide bestseller, right? But actually, as I wrote, this Norwegian Wood is a quite exceptional work, Murakami Haruki's works. This is a very orthodox love story, in a sense, Norwegian Wood, and losing lovers and losing friends. But think of other known long stories. It is very, almost scientific fiction-like stories, right? There are parallel worlds and the dead people coming back to this world, that kind of thing. But in that sense, I think Norwegian word is exceptional, as he himself said. So I think this is one of the reasons why I felt the gap or difference in image I have. So after this big success, he did not come back to Japan, and he went to US, and he writes, when he was young, he was an individualist, of course. He did not want to work for companies, right? He was he was raised, and he spent his student years in the 60s and 70s, right? So, but when he went to the United States, he writes, individualism actually is all over. So nothing special about it. So he writes, he felt he has lost actually his objective purpose. So already everybody is leading a very individualist life in the United States of America. So then this was started to change his mindset, and also there were some other factors, and the decisive factor is a 1995 great earthquake in Kobe, and also the sarin poisonous gas attack that happened here in Tokyo in the subway in 1995. And then he was in the US, but he writes that getting older, now he was feeling the sort of sense of responsibility for the community where he was born and raised. But I think the important point I'd like to emphasize is that it is not because of the Kobe earthquake or the sarin subway attack. Actually, already before that, when he was living in the United States, he was really working on one of the most atrocious battles just before the World War II. That happened in Mongolia. It's called Nomonhan battle. So his personal change and also Japanese society change, I think, coincided. So as a product, after coming back, I think one of the rather controversial work he published was a collection of interviews with a victim of the sarin attack in Tokyo, and also some of the Ohm New Religion cult members. And also in 2000, he published a collection of short stories. In Japanese, the title is Kami no kodomo tachi wa mina odoru. This is not directly takes up the earthquake, but all the stories are related to the people living after the Kobe earthquake. So this was an overall sort of a background or the career of Murakami Haruki I wanted to present. And based on that, I'd like to focus on the problem Murakami Haruki has been thinking on. And so to go to the problem, so let me at first read some quotes from Underground. underground literally meaning subway in Tokyo. And there's a very interesting afterword, and it is most of it available in English translation. Let me read the blue part only. So there's a section, the handed down self, the allotted narrative. 譲り渡された字が与えられた物語。So humans can't live very long without some sense of a continuing story. They are crucial keys to sharing time experience with others. Now, a narrative is a story, not logic, not ethics, nor philosophy. I'd like something to say about this part in the end, but at the end. But it is a dream you keep having, whether you realize it or not. Storyteller and at the same time character in stories. You are storyteller of your own story. Also, you are at the same time character of your story you are living or you are dreaming. So it is through such multi-learning of roles in our stories that we heal the loneliness of being an isolated individual in the world. So he goes on, just what kind of narrative? Anyway, most people are tired of complex, multi-layered scenarios. They are a potential letdown, so the source of disappointment. It's precisely because people can't find any fixed point within their multi-layered schemes that they are tossing aside their self-identity. Such was the narrative offered by Om Shinrikyo. In Japanese society, it's sort of repeated, sort of a part of the modern history. But just in case, briefly, 1995, I think, the new religious cult group called Om Shinrikyo, Om Truth Religion. They have been causing problems, but some members killed many people who were just passengers in the Tokyo subway by using the very strong poison sarin. And what was troubling to lots of Japanese people, scholars also, was the fact that lots of the members of this religious cult were the students or graduates from very good universities in Tokyo, and not even in natural sciences, and from Tokyo University. And so the question was, why on earth these young Japanese people could follow the story, narrative provided by the leader, Asahara Shoko. It was a very simple, very hard to believe story. That is, there comes a Armageddon, the last end of the world war, and all the evil people have to die, and so they have right to kill these people, actually to save their souls. So they felt, some of the members, and just like of your age, students and young graduate students, and they felt they had right to kill other Japanese people in order to save Japanese society and the world. And so they had been given the religious sort of justification for this kind of work. So this was what Murakami Haruki was troubled by too, you know. It was because it was about narrative stories, you know. The fact that so many young Japanese students could be attracted to this kind of, you know, apparently irrational stories and narratives. So he goes on to ask, but were we able to offer them, the young Japanese people, a more viable, more sort of, how do you say, more valuable, more sort of having more power to live, a more viable narrative? Did we have a narrative story, potent, strong enough to chase away Asahara, the leader's utter nonsense? That was a big task. And it's something I'm going, let me read the black part, because this is really at the center of, I am a novelist, and as well as, and as we all know, a novelist is someone who works with narratives, who spins stories professionally, which meant to me that the task at hand was like a gigantic sword dangling above my head. It's something I'm going to have to deal with much more seriously from here on. I know I'm going to have to construct a cosmic communication device of my own. I'll probably have to piece together every last scrap of junk, every weakness, every deficiency inside me to do it. There I've gone and said it, but the real surprise is that it's exactly what I've been trying to do as a writer all along. So then, what about? I'm using the second person, but of course that includes me. So of course he is saying that this question is not a question for himself only as a novelist, but to you. It's being addressed to you, everybody. So he goes on to write, what can I do? I decided to write this book because, in short, I have always wanted to understand Japan at a deeper level. I've been living abroad, away from the country, for a long time, 7 or 8 years, first in Europe and then America. To my surprise, it was only during the last 2 years of my exile that I discovered I urgently wanted to know about that country called Japan. I could feel the change inside me, an ongoing revaluation of my values. I was, to understate the obvious, no longer that young, and by the same token, I suddenly know I was entering the ranks of that generation with a vested duty toward Japanese society. Not because, of course, Murakami Haruki was becoming a nationalist, but simply because it was a community into which he was born and he was raised. I'm going to the last part, so could you be a little bit more patient with me? So, overwhelming violence. So, actually, the question of violence is really one of the central questions for him, as he himself highlights. The Kobe earthquake and the Tokyo gas attack of January and March are two of the gravest tragedies in Japan's post-war history. But actually, as you know, after this, there was a Fukushima nuclear and earthquake, tsunami disaster, 2011, right? So actually, this was not the last most serious tragedies. And so Murakami Haruki also had to think about more sort of serious situations, including the nuclear power generation. But for today, let's concentrate on this, the time around 1995. So it is no exaggeration to say that there was a marked change in Japanese consciousness before and after these events. These twin catastrophes will remain embedded in our psyche as two milestones in our life as a people. Going to the blue part, they ushered in, they introduced a period of critical inquiry into the very roots of Japanese state, Japanese society. And both were nightmarish eruptions, explosions beneath our feet from underground. You notice he uses underground here too, the earthquakes and these natural sort of disasters, that through all the latent contradictions and weak points of our society into frighteningly high relief. In other words, these incidents highlighted were brought into light the weakest points in Japanese society and culture, according to his understanding. So, Japanese society turned out, all too defenseless against these sudden onslaughts, attacks. We were unable to see them coming and failed to prepare, nor did we respond effectively. Very clearly, our side failed. That is, the narrative imagination that most Japanese embraced or had or thought they shared as common images failed to provide a set of values which could countervail or compete effectively against the brutal violence that exploded under us. So let me conclude these. This is one of the sort of dialogues published and translated into English too, is a very interesting dialogue with a Jungian psychologist, Hayao Kawai. And here, Murakami Haruki also talks about violence. Ultimately, Japan's biggest problem is that the war ended, but we never had an opportunity to process the overwhelming violence that occurred during the war. Everyone acted like they were victims, and their real feelings were replaced with extremely ambiguous phrases like, "We must never repeat this mistake again." This is a very famous sort of inscription, right? And you can find on the memorial stone in Hiroshima, right? And no one ever took any personal internal responsibility for the mechanisms that created the violence. Well, some may say that no one is too much generalization. But I think the problems of my generation are also rooted in this. My generation, which grew up with a pacifist constitution, was raised on three principles. Peace should come first, never repeat the same mistake again, and we have renounced war. When we were children, that was okay. These things in themselves are admirable notions, ideas. But as we grew up, we discovered endless contradictions and discrepancies. That's what led to the riots in 1968 and 69. So when I look at Japanese society, I think that righteousness without pain or hardship is not righteousness, meaning that the very reasonable and very understandable sort of ideas are themselves very precious ideas. But Murakami Haruki wants to emphasize that we, at the same time, we really think about the actual sort of violence in the modern Japanese history, also the potential sort of violence we may have inside ourselves, each of us. So today, more than ever, we as a society don't seem to know where we are headed. This is because we haven't properly dealt with the past. And you may say this is not really Murakami's unique sort of view, but one of the shared critical, self-critical views among Japanese. And thinking back on the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle now, in which Murakami Haruki describes the Nomonhan battle in 1939, and very violent descriptions. And some of my foreign students say they do not really like it, and they say they do not really understand why Murakami Haruki has to write this kind of really violent things. But I am slowly starting to make sense of it. First, I came to my own personal understanding of historical violence, and now I'm at a point where I have to figure out which direction I should go in next, but I don't know exactly where this will lead me. Actually, I wanted to share with you some of the very impressive scenes, very distinctive scenes in the recent work. One of the relatively recent work, Kafka on the Shore, Umibe no Kafka. I think if you read, you know that there's descriptions of very violent acts and the very tortures of a killing of the cats. Cats Murakami Haruki loves, and you may be really astonished or at the sort of violent sort of nature of the pages. But I think on seeing from the Murakami Haruki side, when we think, knowing the fact that actually, he had been interested in what actually happened in Mongolia in 1939. In Japan, it's known as the Nomonhan Jiken or Nomonhan Senso. But actually, this was a really terrible battle. So I think Murakami Haruki may respond that actually you might find his writing too violent in some places, but actually to think, we need to think back on what happened. And this is the last point I want to sort of introduce. And one of the very sort of distinctive, very strong sort of pages, for example, in Kafka on the Shore, I think is where he describes people running, or people walking very fast, or even driving a car. And I think he is really good at these sort of descriptions. I think which is, which come from his own sort of fascination with running and driving a car, and etc. And so maybe I should not read, but let me point out that toward the end of the Kafka on the Shore, there's a very symbolic sort of scenes where his sort of concern with Japan's past during the war, and also his sort of concern with the dead people come together in a very interesting, very artistic way. So and basically this is what I had, what I wanted to share with you. I'm not sure I could sort of convey my points well or not, but yeah, let me stop here. Thank you very much for your patience.
I would like to thank Professor Kazashi for his long lecture, a very insightful lecture, and I would like to open the floor for questions and comments.
Thank you very much for your very interesting lecture. And I have one comment and one question. And my comment is that, Murakami was born in 1949, and Asahara was born in 1955. So there may be some kind of a small generation gap between them. And also, the main high-ranking disciples who exerted who did a sarin gas attack were a little bit more younger. It is my age, like 1958 or 1959. So in this and there is a 10-year generation gap between Murakami and those high-ranking believers. Okay, so when I feel that when Murakami writes my generation, so it might be a little bit we have it should be good we have a little bit doubt about his understanding. So I am very I'm curious about his thought on those gender gap between 1948 generation and after the other generation who were 10 years or so younger than Murakami's generation. And this is my comment. And my question is that I read, this year, I forget, but in Mainichi Shimbun, Mainichi newspaper, he wrote about the execution of Shimiko Asahara and the disciples. And there he showed a kind of a reluctant support on capital punishment.
Yes.
So when reading his essay, I was shocked to know that oh, he supports. However, reluctantly, but I had a kind of a shock, and this was a shocking event for me. So, do you have some comment on his idea, or his opinion on capital punishment and its relationship with his, for example, his idea of violence or the value of human life and so on and so on? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Morioka Sensei. And thank you very much for coming in the first place. Actually, about the generation and I wanted to say something about the much later generation and how his works were read by the Japanese critics and scholars now in their 30s or in 40s. But let me go to your question first. And at first, to some of you, as Morioka Sensei explained, those who committed this poisonous gas attack in 1995 here in Tokyo were executed, capital punishment, legally. And this became controversy recently in Japan again, because for one thing, lots of European countries are opposed to capital punishment, right? But Japan is still continuing to sort of conduct, carry out this capital punishment. So this itself has been a very serious sort of problem. And so when the leader of this case, for one thing, not only one, but the Japanese government Ministry of Justice decided to execute almost more than 10 people in a short span of time. So it was a sort of a show of execution of people. So there was a very serious critique, especially from the European countries which have already abolished capital punishment, that Japanese government is still doing this kind of thing, and in this way, in a very political way. So then Murakami Haruki was asked to contribute a short essay to a newspaper, one of the most well-known newspaper, Mainichi, and so in which Murakami said, Morioka Sensei said, Murakami Haruki said, to be frank, I know that as a sort of legal idea, the capital punishment should be abolished, but because he attended the laws and sort of the exchange of views at court, this sort of legal case lasted for a long time. So lots of the people went to the court in Tokyo to listen to the exchange of legal debates. And Murakami Haruki, one of those people. So Murakami Haruki said, because he was exposed to the kind of sort of argument presented by the victims' families. He wrote, he is very reluctant to say that capital punishment should not have been carried out. So this was the point. And I think the point of Morioka Sensei is that I think even if one felt a hesitation or reluctance or sort of a wavering sort of a mind, I think as a conclusion, I think Murakami Haruki nonetheless made it clear that he was opposed to the capital punishment. And I basically agree, but if I may say, I think as a novelist, I think, having interviews with the victims and the publishing underground, the collection of interviews, I think, in a sense, I think I can sympathize with the fact that he felt a very deep, troubling sort of hesitations. But so personally, I think I wish also he could say as a conclusion a clear sort of principled sort of opposition to the capital punishment, and but I think if I sort of try to stand on his sort of side, I think he wanted to express or share what he experienced when he was listening to the victims' families, and I'm sure this was a satisfying answer to your very difficult question.
What about the generation?
Yeah. I didn't think about the generation gap between Murakami Haruki himself and these own people and disciples, but so I'd like to think about it. But what I had in mind is that so in the last part, I wanted to sort of present a sort of critical sort of views, if there was time, and that was what I said about the sort of critical sort of reactions coming out from the younger sort of generation of Japanese critics in their 30s and in early 40s, and I think interestingly, some of the Japanese very well-known, very creative critics, they used to really like Murakami's early works, but now some of them say that regarding the recent works, they are really getting more and more disappointed. So the reason is, I think, is related to, has to do with generations. I think they say that actually up to the around 1995, actually Murakami Haruki's sort of thinking or sensitivities was very, how to say, in close relationship with what's going on actually in Japanese society. But after that, and although in his thinking, Murakami Haruki is trying to cope with, for example, what happened after Fukushima. But I think some Japanese young critics say, I think maybe Murakami Haruki is getting out of tune with the contemporary present Japanese society. And so actually I tend to agree with these younger generations critics. Yeah.
So you introduced a comment by Murakami which says that narrative as a life-guiding, meaning-forming story is not logic or philosophy nor ethics. So you said that you have some comments about it. So could you elaborate a little about it?
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, when this almost sort of 1995 poison gas attack happened in 1995, I was teaching in Hiroshima, and so I had to talk about it in my lectures and the seminars. And at that time, I did not think of sort of alternative narratives, but I thought sort of philosophical questioning can be a way to counter the very bad narratives. And that is to say, and this is what I'm thinking still, that is to say, there's a philosophy of narratives, but actually philosophy itself is not a narrative. I think it can be told in a narrative, but I think, as you know, the beginning of philosophical questioning is a sort of wonder or surprise at the being of the world. And I think in that sense, the philosophical thinking or questioning starts at the point where narratives cannot be at least easily given. And it starts at the limit of the sort of human thinking. So I think in the case of Murakami Haruki, I think he is trying to come up with alternative, sort of different kinds of narratives to deal with these problems in Japanese society. I think I'm not against it, but I think as a sort of philosophy scholar, I think philosophy or philosophical questioning can be at least one of the ways to counter the problem. And I'm not sure my response makes sense.
There could be some objection to the effect that philosophical discourse could be one of the narratives.
Yes.
So what do you say to this statement?
Yes, of course. Philosophy of narrative and sort of philosophy as a narrative, I think they are related, can be related. But what I wanted to sort of emphasize is a point that for example, to put it in a concrete examples, for example, do you know some of the Japanese students, do you remember why these young Japanese people, even majoring in natural sciences, were attracted to Asahara Shoko? One was that the Asahara Shoko claimed that he could perform a miraculous sort of thing, you know, keeping his body floating on the ground or something like that. So, but I thought in philosophy, the kind of wonder or the kind of sort of astonishment that are in question is not some particular strange phenomenon, but the very fact that we are living and the world exists. And we don't know why, right? We are living, but actually when we are asked, we don't know why we came into being in the first place. So in that sense, the living life itself and the existence of the world itself is a miraculous thing, right? So in that sense, I felt that these followers of this religious cult, they were not understanding this level of sort of a surprising sort of a wonder. They were attracted to the very specific pseudo or fake wonders. So these pseudo particular wonders, surprises, were part of their narrative.
Other questions or comments?
I'm curious, there must be some really great fan of Murakami Haruki. In Japan, there's a term, Harukist. I guess there are some Harukists here. And I'm curious how you found my today's sort of, overall characterization. And actually, this is one of the, I think, at the moment, this is a very sort of a, how to say, persuasive and way to understand what he is struggling with. But actually, the one, as I said, even among Japanese sort of scholars and people, there are all sorts of views, and some of the Japanese scholars who were great fan of Murakami Haruki when Murakami Haruki was writing his early works. Some of them say they really became disappointed when Murakami Haruki started becoming social, and it's. So I think there can be all sorts of ways to read, of course. Yeah.
I guess I'll use the remaining time for a short comment and a question. A lot of topics were raised. The human propensity towards committing acts of violence. You started off the talk with referring to the theme of relationship toward or with the dead. If I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I'm wrong. This is also something that Shuichi Kato has been deeply involved in. And toward the end of your talk, there was a passage, I'll paraphrase, that so the relationship with the dead, and then he says, as a society, we don't know where we're headed today. He refers to the Japanese society, but I guess this applies to any society in the world, because we haven't properly dealt with the past, and the past is filled with the dead. So I just wanted to ask you, what do you make of this? And I think it's very interesting and deep point, and we can see that it's a recurring theme as well in Haruki Murakami's work. Yeah.
Thank you very much. As we know, even now, I think the relationship between Japan and Korea, especially, is getting really, really serious, right? Because of the past problem, history, and so this is not the problem for the problem only Murakami Haruki is keenly conscious of, and also this question of the dead is also actually, especially after the Fukushima disaster, has become one of the focal points of the people's concern. not only in philosophy and sociology and also literature, poetry, and in a word, for example, in philosophy. And actually, this sort of question about the dead is not something that came up recently. And even there was a thinking about this question during the wartime too. But particularly now, for example, put it simply, for example, Japanese philosopher, for example, Tanabe says, so we tended to think in sort of in a very clear-cut ways. Something is existing or something is not existing. But in the case of the dead people, it is very difficult for us human beings to how to regard the existence of the dead people. So in a normal sense, we of course think that the dead people do not exist any longer. But still, we hold memorial services and we go to the tombs. And in that sense, we keep being concerned about the dead people. So in that sense, I think we continue holding and developing a relationship with the dead people who are, in an ordinary sense, not existing. So in this sense, I think to another concrete example, I think not only Murakami Haruki, there are quite a number, some Japanese sort of people and scholars and psychologists also who have been thinking about this. That is, what happened to those Japanese people who went to, for example, China and the Asian countries and who fought there and who came back to Japan, just like the father of Murakami Haruki. And so, for example, there's a sort of expression of a loss of sorrow among these people. And so there has been a psychological problem, but I think, in a positive note, I think very recently there has been sort of a study and sort of a report about what, for example, Japanese soldiers really felt and experienced during the war. And for example, Japanese soldiers are very brave soldiers of the very godlike country, Japan. And that kind of image has been binding our understanding. But actually, lots of Japanese soldiers, young people who went to China, who had to fight China, fighting was horrifying. And some of them were devastated. And some of them also went mad crazy. And some of them had to be hospitalized. But these histories have not been discussed in Japan until recently, openly. But I think one of the things coming out, and there's some special TV program about this. So I think I want to say that this question of the relationship with the dead is not really a special case for Murakami Haruki and his father. But I think it may be hard to recognize on the daily life, but I think it is a very ongoing undercurrent in Japanese post-war society and mentality. Yeah.
So we're right on time, 8:30. Thank you all for coming, and I would like to thank the guest speaker today.